the Spot Track Podcast, talking sports contracts, the salary cap, and business of sports.
Today's edition of the Spot Track Podcast is presented by Bettor Edge. You dabble in sports betting like I do, like Brandon Kravitz does, like Dan Selman does, like anybody listening to this podcast does. You need an alternative, a brand you can trust that gives you the right to choose the odds and get the edge you're looking for. Bettor Edge recognized a problem and solved it. Too much money was being lost on house-favored lines. The house always wins. Bettor Edge is a social betting marketplace that gives users from more than 45 states the chance to win every bet by creating their own prices without the vig or the juice. They're safe, they're reliable, the payouts are immediate, and you can sign up today using code SPOTTRACK to get $20 on the house. Visit bettoredge.com. That's bettoredge.com. My name is Mike Ginnitti. It is Monday, February 24th. Nice little NBA weekend, nice little soccer weekend, if that's what you're into. MLS is back. The women's national team, lots of English Premier League soccer. I'm guessing I'm talking to nobody, but that's the that's what the last 48 hours was for me pretty heavily. And that's what happens when the NFL is off and Major League Baseball is in spring training mode for me. But I digress. We got a lot to get to here. Speaking of Major League Baseball, our off-season recaps have started to hit the books on SpotTrack.com, starting with the NL Central, which is not for nothing. I think there's maybe a trade or two still to come out of that division before it's all said and done here as February turns to March. And the American League Central is hot off the presses here, probably by the time you're listening to this. Maybe the tightest division in sports in baseball this year, this AL Central. The team projected to be fourth, won the division last year, and changed a little bit, but not enough to be fourth after being first. So I'll just give you that kind of preview. It's going to be tight. There's not much to hate about this division if you're an AL Central fan. Let's put it that way. The White Sox lost 120 games last year. They might do it again. So there's that. But I've had a lot of fun really doing these recaps and kind of diving into each team specifically. For instance, if you are a Cubs fan, this is going to be a fun year for you. This was an active offseason, and I'm not sure they're even close to done. I think they're going to assess the moves they've made quickly and pivot quickly, if I'm speaking correctly in those terms. I think this is going to be an aggressive 2025 for the Chicago Cubs, and maybe a couple of these teams in the AL Central that I'm referencing here as well, who I think there's at least one big move coming out of Cleveland here in the next week or two, which could shake up things a little bit for a few more divisions that I'm about to sit down to. But I enjoy these. They're pretty thorough. We go through obviously the projected payrolls, the adds and subtractions, all the trades that hit, and even some prospect stuff, which Dan Sohm has been an integral piece to our puzzle for the last couple of years here. So if you're worried about where your team sits in the farm system or who the top prospects are and who stands to make a difference, even just for 2025 alone, that's what this is about, along with all the money that's been spent in free agency and yada, yada, yada. You get it. Plenty to read here if you're a baseball fan looking to gear up for March and April as we get there. NFL-wise, I posted the cap casualty piece. It's not as thorough as I've done in the past because I'm really targeting specific notable players this time. And that's what we're going to talk about here in the next couple of minutes, is specifically a few teams that, I don't know, not so much stuck, but boy, is it going to be a tough couple of weeks for them as they head towards March 12th and that 2025 league year. But that piece is now live. There's one player per team that I've identified, and they're all pretty notable. Obviously, there's a few quarterbacks that we'll get to here. A couple all-pro defensive linemen that will probably slide in here in a couple of minutes. But I think the biggest thing is the wide receiver pool, because number one, it was already a bad free agent class. It's a weird draft class, as we'll see here this week at the Combine. Solid, but nothing's jumping off the page Justin Jefferson-wise, let's put it that way. Which means that teams and front offices are doing this. They're trying to identify not just the big names that are going to fall off these rosters, whether it's a cap casualty, whether it's an aged out situation, whether it's we're a terrible team and we shouldn't have this player right now. I'm looking at you, Raiders. There's a lot. And I think there's going to be some significant second tier wide receiver moves, maybe right as soon as this league year starts, with a player like DK Metcalf, with a player like Tyreek Hill, who I know it's been back and forth and up and down. And by the way, there's like no financial ramifications that benefit the Dolphins to do this. And I still think they're going to do it because it seems like from a football standpoint, they need to shake things up a little bit. And that's probably a decent place to start. I don't think they'll go as high as like a Bradley Chubb trade, but that's on the table here too. Again, not for cap purposes, not for financial purposes, but they're in a bit of a stuck mode right now with their cap, their roster, with some of the decisions they've had to make. And you've already seen them pillage 3 veteran contracts just to get the ball rolling a little bit here. So let's dive into some of these names. The plan here with the NFL is I've done extensions. I've done some internal work on team by teams. Obviously, we've done some notable free agents that are coming up here. When tag stuff becomes available, obviously we'll detail that. No, nothing official yet with T. Higgins, though it's largely expected that at the end of the day, when this window closes, he will have his second franchise tag slapped on him. So I think next is going to be this trade discussion, which is, it's a bit of a trial and error. You're trying to read through a lot of the tea leaves that are out there that we'll start with right now, by the way, because I think the most polarizing team, at least to end off February, is the Los Angeles Rams. They snuck out of nowhere last year because they've drafted extremely well, especially defensively speaking. And Matthew Stafford's still doing it at a high level. And when you put those things together with a hell of a coaching staff, obviously, and a division that sort of, I don't know, not crumbled around them, but certainly opened up opportunities for them to take the next step, which is what they did. Now they're in a position where it's, do we smell blood from 2024 and just continue down that path? Or do we really think about properly supplementing these draft picks, right? Because you've got a situation where 15 to 20% of this roster is aging out, and they know it. And they've gone through some of that really every year, with Aaron Donald, et cetera. And now 15 to 20% of this roster is max value rookie contract controlled. So it's how aggressive are we going to be in the middle, in the fat part of this roster? Do we go and swing big at a couple of free agents, which is something they generally don't do? Or do we attack this thing from the top down and refuse to give Matthew Stafford his 2 for $85 extension, which is worthy, by the way? That's exactly where he should be, about 2 for $82 million, with a nice little signing bonus, obviously, which is what he's looking for, is to sweeten all of 2025 and probably some of 2026 to finish this off. He's 37. We all know where this is headed. He's also playing at a high level still, at least within this construct. I think, because me, I'm always trying to poke holes, and I'm always trying to understand why we're hearing what we're hearing, especially on February 24th. You're not wrong to say that the Rams are simply just posturing here with Matthew Stafford, that they don't want to pay even at market value for a 37-year-old that they know they also have to find his incumbent, his replacement right now to some degree. And maybe that replacement is something they have to go pay for right now, Sam Darnold. So I think the options are all there, and they're simply just trying to navigate the best approach. Now, if they can get Stafford on what they would consider team-friendly value, they're happy to do it. And I think they're happy to do it for 2 more years based on where things are. Now, is there concern about a Cousins situation? Of course. Aaron Rodgers? Of course. But I don't think either of those situations are as bad as they are being advertised right now. When you factor in the money, Aaron Rodgers on $38 million was never going to work with that current Jets iteration. All right. But Stafford on 37 million or 40 million in this current Rams iteration does make a little bit of sense. Now, they're a wide receiver away. They probably have to flip over the Tyler Higbee situation at tight end. There's at least 2 offensive line positions that need to be flipped over or retained to some degree. And there's some secondary pieces that they'll be working on as well this offseason. But for the most part, they have staggered this development process extremely well, with the exception of the quarterback position, because they know that they've been playing on house money and they're simply trying to drag that out as long as humanly possible. And again, I believe that they want to continue with Matthew Stafford. So here's the plan. I believe them, and obviously it's true, it's happening, that they have allowed Stafford and his agency to go out there and talk to other teams. Fine. So why is that happening? Are they hoping to be blown away by a trade offer? Well, that's part one. Okay, if somebody comes in with a Sam Bradford first-round pick for 37-year-old Matthew Stafford who needs a new contract, you're taking that. Okay, you're taking it. That's not going to happen. And when it doesn't happen, and even a middling offer comes in from the Raiders or the Giants or one of these teams who doesn't make a little bit of sense, maybe the Steelers, I don't know. Matthew Stafford in cold weather's bad. Just look at the numbers. It's bad. The Giants and the Steelers should not be considering this. But anyway, if a middling offer comes in, okay, the only question that the Rams really want to know is, great, but what are they offering him contractually? Because that's what this is about. It isn't so much about what can we get from Matthew Stafford right now. Because again, you'd need to blow the doors off for them to completely shake things up here. They want to know what the Giants are willing to spend on Matthew Stafford once he gets in the door, or the Steelers, or the Raiders. What is Matthew Stafford worth to a brand new team who wants him for 2 years? And when that price is set, now there's at least something for them to reference. And if there are teams willing to go out there, and by the way, they could posture on their own end and say, hey, we're willing to give you a 3rd-round pick, but we're going to give them a 2 for 85 extension. Okay. Now that's the number. Now it's not the number the Rams have to live with. You know, they can still do their homework. They can also, of course, play the long game and say, look, we're happy to send you to the Giants, but you're going to lose, 12 games next year. And you're going to be home on January 1st instead of actively getting yourself ready and healthy for a postseason run again. They have that in their back pocket as well. So it's a better situation, probably a better coaching situation, probably a better offensive system, obviously, because it's worked for years now. They just have to make the money work. I believe that they are listening to offers from Matthew Stafford. They may take 1 or 2 of them extremely seriously because he's 37. And if you can get a top 100 draft pick for a 37-year-old, even at this position, you listen. But at the end of the day, they're simply letting Matthew Stafford's market value be set by other franchises, which, does that sound dangerous? I think they're just understanding that they're not going to be blown away. All right. Nobody's going to go out there and actually, especially on the heels of the disaster in New York for Rodgers, the utter disaster for Kirk Cousins in Atlanta, which is about to come to a head. And to some degree, still the Russell Wilson contract in Denver, which was very much like this. Let's acquire an aging, slightly declining quarterback and try to fix him. And then the second we get him in the door, we've got to make him the guy, the face of this franchise. So we're going to give him an overpaid extension. Now, that was to the nth degree, but that's essentially, right, the risk that these teams that are apparently in on Matthew Stafford are running. We've had 3 really bad versions of this in the past 3 seasons. And those 3 teams are still paying for them. Some about to pay cash and cap. The other 3 paying significant cap hits still in 2025 to fix those mistakes. It's a mistake worth taking because it's a quarterback position. And that's where the Giants and the Raiders and these teams are all in. But it's a buyer beware situation that the Rams are really just dangling out there because they know they have essentially the biggest fish. He's a talented, still capable of winning ball games quarterback that wants a little bit more money than they're willing to hand out right now because, as I started with, this is an organization that could, if they wanted to, be extremely aggressive this and next offseason to tack on to what's been a really good 2-3 year run in the draft. So, fascinating stuff. Again, the timing is everything. The reason I'm not linking the Stafford stuff to the Cooper Kupp stuff is I believe they're two completely separate scenarios. I think you've heard me talk about Cooper Kupp enough. He is obviously the name I've identified in the piece, this cap casualty piece that's now live on SpotTrick.com. I break it all out there in terms of what the numbers will be. I actually think Cooper Kupp has a chance to be traded. Now, what happens with this roster bonus, which is sneaking up here on March 16th? Do the Rams have to eat that, eat all of it, some of it? They've done this in the past. I think if I'm a team looking to acquire a Kupp, that's the avenue I'm going. Let's split that 50-50, something to that degree. And then we're willing to give up a fourth, a conditional fourth that could be a third if he catches 90 balls, whatever it's going to be. But I think that's a very tradable situation for a team just looking to sort of Adam Thielen a player like Cooper Kupp late in his early 30s here, late in his career. And I do believe there are teams out there that need this exact scenario. It's a different conversation for Deebo Samuel and some of the other names that we've talked about before, but are also on this piece, because it doesn't actually make financial sense for the 49ers to trade Deebo Samuel at all, unless they're doing it after June. And then at that point, there's not even a 2025 draft pick that can be included. So Deebo's probably a post 6-1 cut, or they're just going to keep him, see how the draft goes for everybody, and certainly the offseason. And then if they can sneak a June or July trade of Deebo Samuel, that does make sense. The problem is, because the reports are out there, because the 49ers have disclosed the fact that Deebo Samuel's on the trade block, I don't know that you can keep him around for 3 more months. Let's just put it that way. But we've seen it happen, and we've seen it happen with this franchise specifically. They are willing to play hardball to get what they're looking for. I'm just telling you right now, the math doesn't add up for them to trade Deebo Samuel at all over the next couple of months here. They'd be taking a loss, and that doesn't make sense, especially with 1 or 2 significant contracts probably hitting their books within the next couple of weeks as well. All right, a couple other names on this cap casualty list and some storylines to go with it. The big one is going to be Kirk Cousins, obviously. I think you know the numbers at this point in time. Here's the thing. I don't think he's tradable, but every time I think that, somebody comes in, right? It only takes one team. And the teams that don't get Stafford, because that isn't a real thing at the end of the day, still have to be looking at Kirk Cousins at $27.5 million. I guess it's $37.5 million when you lock in that $10 million for next year. It's not the worst price. It's exactly the same price as what Aaron Rodgers is going to be released out of. Now, are those players essentially toe-to-toe? Yeah, probably. I think Rodgers might have a little bit more left than Cousins might, because for some reasons, it's just taken Cousins way too long to recover from this thing in terms of his injury. But there's a team that's going to be out there that believes that they can get him at least 85% healthy, which is 25% better than the quarterback play they've had going forward. I just don't think you're giving up draft compensation to sort of let the Falcons off the hook here. You just let him hit the post 6-1 designation, and then you're essentially fighting with 3 or 4 teams for minimum salary Kirk Cousins. That's the reason you acquire him, by the way, is that the second he hits the open market, he becomes 50% more attractive because of his cost. Doesn't make him a better quarterback, just makes him a more attractive quarterback. That's all. So we'll see how this plays out. There's a lot of ways this could go. Atlanta can eat some of this money as well to facilitate a trade if they need to. I don't know that that's the case, but they're playing with house money now with Penix to some degree. So they may be motivated to buy themselves even a late round draft pick to somebody who wants to jump the gun on the Cousins situation before March 12th. Von Miller in Buffalo, we talked about him a little bit during our Bills segment. Bills have a lot of moving parts here. 6-7 legitimate extension candidates. Obviously, James Cook being one of the bigger ones who's being out there and vocal. They for sure have to address this defensive line. It's a good draft to do that. If they believe they have something identified in the top 2 picks here, or I guess the top 100 picks, I don't think they have a second right now, then Von Miller is just going to be gone. And by the way, moving on from the Von Miller contract, regardless, probably good business. This is a team that's minus 15 in top 51 space right now as we talk on on February 24th. So there's going to be some pain to get to the gain. My guess is they've already had internal discussions with Von Miller about what 2025 could look like. They could absolutely take the approach of a pay cut with some incentives. But I think this time around, I'm just cutting the head off at this contract. And then we can sit down and talk about a renegotiated contract, a start over contract that sort of helps everybody. But I don't think I'm even doing that until I know how my free agency goes and my draft goes. And then if I need a plug and play depth option that could be 36-year-old Von Miller, so be it. But I think at this point in time, the Bills are in a financial situation that they just have to move on from contracts that are maybes and just hope that they have enough clout, because they do, to keep those players in mind over the course of the next couple of weeks and months to bring them back as needed. A couple of these players, by the way, have already been released. Gerald Everett, tight end out of the Bears. That was a no-brainer. He's just fallen off a cliff in terms of productivity. And Cole Kmet got a big contract, so we knew where that was headed. Joe Bitonio, the guard in Cleveland, is sort of on the fence with retirement. He's 33. He struggled with some injuries. This is a Browns team that is crazy fluid, obviously. A lot of ties to Kirk Cousins and some of these quarterbacks that could become stopgap situations. Obviously, with Deshaun recovering from injury and likely not playing another snap for this Browns team as they just try to grin and bear this contract situation. But Bitonio would be a hole that they'll have to replace, and they're going to have to replace a left tackle and at least one guard, and we'll see what happens elsewhere. But man, you start to look across this roster, especially offensively speaking, and it's like Jerry Jeudy and David Njoku for one more year, and then a whole bunch of maybes. And that's why you've got Myles Garrett out there. And that's why Denzel Ward is threatening to be right out there as well if Garrett gets moved, because the vets who are tied up or have been tied up are reading the writing on the wall, which is something we've been reading for a while now. It just took them publicly decrying, all right, we screwed up this Watson thing. We all knew they screwed it up 48 months ago. They did too, but they weren't able to admit it. Now they are. And now the gloves are off. Okay. And the gloves are off with how they're going to operate this offseason, but also how some of their internal players are going to react to this. So must see TV, this Cleveland Browns situation, starting with a player like Bitonio, who is obviously has been one of the anchors on the inside of this offensive line. And it just might be another piece of their puzzle that they have to work to replace this offseason. And another reason for them to actually trade Myles Garrett. Because if it means 4 draft picks coming back, well, starting those draft picks off with offensive linemen makes a heck of a lot of sense, especially if you're also going to be drafting your next quarterback in the upcoming 2025 draft here as well. All right, a little bit farther down the list, I'd be remiss if I skipped Detroit. This was a tough one. They've done a lot of great work extending some players. There's a couple more options to extend this offseason, especially defensively. I don't think Jamison Williams is on that list quite yet. He might hit my trade list, though, because they do have a bit of a surplus, and they do have a need to pick and choose now who's going to get that second contract. They've almost paid everybody, and that's not possible. So even with staggering, even with, empty pocketbooks, things like that, they're going to have to pick and choose. And Williams has just had too many I don't know. Obviously, the off the field stuff has been there, but there's been some inconsistencies on the field as well. And you can tell that Ben Johnson's had to use him more as a gadget player than more of a consistent, reliable weapon. That may be somebody else's problem here soon. Okay. And if T. Higgins doesn't move, if Chris Godwin is retained in Tampa Bay, as I was alluding to at the open here, this wide receiver market's going to get from bad to worse. Those are the kind of players, and we'll identify that probably next week, that become extremely attractive, right? DK Metcalf, Jameson Williams, Tyreek Hill. Two of those teams now that are looking for plan B and plan C. The player I've identified for Detroit, though, is Alexander Anzalone, the inside linebacker, who is a monster. And he's a 30-year-old who can still absolutely light up the stat board. He's a captain of the defense type player. He missed 6 weeks with an arm injury, which sort of allowed the 2023 first rounder Jack Campbell to slide into this thing. And I'm not saying Jack Campbell is even close to the experience, the consistency, the reliability that Anzalone can be. But this is one of those decisions, right? These are the decisions that all these contending teams have to make now every offseason. Where can we make a flip? Where can we go from drafted rookie to even a slightly expensive veteran player? It's probably the right time to move on here. Now, is he tradable? Maybe. All right, maybe. They can free up about $5 million to move on in any capacity, whether that's a trade, whether that's an outright release. But this is a team that isn't flush with cap space, but isn't in trouble either. So just a team that we're watching left and right. They're obviously one of the bigger teams for Myles Garrett. I don't think this is one of those situations where you can include a player like Anzalone in that kind of trade, but you might move on from him to free up the space. So again, very fluid stuff. Jair Alexander, cornerback for the Packers, staying in the NFC North division. Falling out of favor in the middle of 2024. You could just tell with the injuries piling up over the past couple of seasons that this was coming to a head. He's got a non-guaranteed $17.5 million this year. I would assume that that's too much even to trade. But again, it only takes one team. It's a pretty good cornerback draft. It's an okay cornerback market, but not for players like this. If this guy's healthy, he's still a shutdown outside cornerback, and he's only 28 years old. There's 2 years left in this contract. There's a world where a team that looks at him and says, we just want him for a stretch run. And maybe that's a Baltimore, maybe that's a Dallas. There's a possibility here that Green Bay gets some value back for Jair Alexander out the door. Jacksonville finally got a general manager. We'll see what his moves are going to be as they try to get some cap compliancy headed up here for March 12th. The wide receiver stuff's weird. It has been. They swung and missed on Gabe Davis last year. The Evan Engram stuff at tight end hasn't worked out, to the best situation, even though you can tell there's a clear relationship there with he and Trevor Lawrence, who's not getting traded, by the way. And then there's Christian Kirk, who, by all intents, was a massive success out of the gate on what we all thought was a massive overpay in free agency. And now we're headed towards the back end of this contract. Brian Thomas Jr. is an absolute stud. So the question is simply this: is Christian Kirk on 1 for $16.5 million worthy of trying to cover up Gabe Davis in 2025? Or is this just one of those situations where you move on, cut your losses, and send him out to a market where, by the way, there aren't many other options. So there's a very good chance that if Kirk is released out of Jacksonville, he becomes one of the top names on this open market on March 12th, kind of immediately, even though he's had injuries each of the last couple of seasons that have really downplayed things. So one to watch there for sure. Gardner Minshew in Vegas seems to have lost any chance to start for them going forward. It's probably Aiden O'Connell and then TBD, right? However they handle this offseason, if that's Sam Darnold, if that's a drafted player, if that's Aaron Rodgers. I think there's talk about all that happening right now. But it seems like Minshew's on his way out, even though he's got $3.1 million fully guaranteed for the upcoming season. There's offsets. So if he goes and signs a near minimum, 1 for 2, 1 for 2.5 this offseason, it'll offset what the Raiders actually pay him at the end of the day. But it's not for nothing. It's probably more than he would make on a standard contract right now as a backup quarterback. So he's in a pretty good spot here either way. And it looks like he'll be looking for work this offseason in the next couple of weeks as a cap casualty as well. Joey Bosa probably falls off this Chargers roster this time. Now, I realize that Mack is one of the preeminent free agents as well, Khalil Mack, probably not returning as well. So this is a position that they'll have to completely revamp for the Chargers going forward. They've got draft picks to do that. They are dark horses in a Myles Garrett conversation. I'd put it that way. And there's just too much to free up here. I mean, there's $25.3 million to free up by moving on from Joey Bosa before March 12th, when he's got a $12 million roster bonus to be paid. So even if you want to bring him back, this time around, you just cut the contract off and you start talking about something brand new and go from there. I mentioned Kupp. I mentioned Tyreek Hill to a certain degree. Derek Carr is a mess. I still think he's a pretty good player. And I still think the Saints think he's a pretty good player. I don't think anybody wants anything to do with $40 million, but that's what's happening here. Okay, now 10 of that is fully guaranteed right now. Another 30 locks in on March 14th. That's not the real problem here. The problem is there's $50 million of bonus dead cap on this contract right now. Okay, and you can post June 1st them, but that alleviates nothing until June 1st, and they are minus 50 on their top 51 space right now. Now, can you renegotiate the contract to drop the base salary to make him a cleaner post-June 1st release? Yeah. He's got to play ball. Okay. And I'm not sure he's going to be thrilled. But, and I'll say this delicately, there is a world where one of these teams in need, right, who swings and misses on Stafford, doesn't want to pay Sam Darnold for whatever reason, considers Derek Carr the best plan B they have, at least for the next couple of seasons. If that's the case, and those conversations are already happening behind the scenes, now Derek Carr can start to play ball. Okay, now he can work with the Saints, become a viable post 6-1 designation, right? Drop his base salary so that his cap hit isn't 50, it's 30. Something they can work with until June. And he's already got his plan B lined up and a healthy 2 for $40 type contract to make some of this money back, along with, of course, the $10 million guaranteed that he's going to be making out the door, which is fully guaranteed from the Saints. It's a bit of a mess, and it's fluid, and it's not something any of us can put our fingers on right now. And by the way, you can use the roster management tool for the Saints until you're blue in the face. I'm having a hell of a hard time freeing up $50 million for this team right now, because they are at that point where most of the contracts you want to get out of have been converted to death so that the dead cap is 2/3 higher than the cap hit. You're only allowed 2 post 6-1 designations. Okay. I think they've already got both of those bookmarked. But what do you do with Carr and Kamara and Cam Jordan and Taysom Hill and players that I don't think have any future with this team? But still, not only may they be on this roster in 2025, they're going to have their salaries converted just to get the cap compliancy. They're at that point. They're at that point of absolute no return with how they've been managing the salary cap. And I'm not knocking them for what they've been doing. Okay. We've had multiple discussions on this podcast about what the Eagles have been doing and how when you hit on some draft picks and a quarterback, that style of cap gymnastics just fits the bill. It's constantly allowing you to replenish this roster. But when you don't hit on the quarterback and when you don't hit on draft picks, and they've missed, and they've had some unfortunate retirements due to injury and things like that, and there's another one coming this year, I think. When those kind of things catch up with you all at the same time, and you don't have a quarterback that can transcend the roster and really not one in sight, you're stuck in the mud because you're trying to go backwards and your salary cap is not allowing it to happen. So they're going to need some help. All right. They're going to need some serious help, from their own players, to sort of smooth out some of these post 6-1s, but also in terms of just flat out pay cuts, which is the secret sauce that can sort of save some of these scenarios. I don't see that happening, on a big basis. I know they've already asked Carr, and that was a flat out no. So I don't imagine that trickles down to, the third string tight end. But again, go hack away at this thing on the roster tool, and you'll understand just how concerned they should be, the fan base should be, with just how difficult the next couple of months are going to be, because it's not as easy as just saying we're going to whack 7 players. It's not, because whacking those players adds cap loss. Doesn't subtract cap. Okay, it's a mess. All right, Davante Adams for sure falls off this roster. I guess the only question is this: is he tradable? He'd be trading for his rights, okay? Because nobody's trading for 2 years, $72.5 million of Davante Adams. That's lunacy. Now, you'd have to acquire that contract and then rip it up and start over, of course. But there's a world where, again, with this weird wide receiver offseason, where Davante is, at the end of the day, the top billing. Would a team want Davante Adams over Christian Kirk right now? What about Davante Adams over DeAndre Hopkins or Amari Cooper, or to some degree DK Metcalf if he's allowed to walk into the trade block? There's a path here where he's a little bit more wanted than we're giving him credit for. And I wonder if they can move that contract and get back a little bit of value that they've squandered in the Rodgers and this Adams trade as well, not to mention Hassan Reddick. We mentioned Debo. Tyler Lockett for sure is going to fall off the Seattle roster. It's only a question of, does he want to return on something more fair market value, or is he actually going to join a new roster for the first time in his career? And then finally, the Washington Commanders, who we expect to be uber active, certainly in the Myles Garrett conversation. I put them in the Tyreek Hill conversation as well, for a lot of reasons. But it seems like they're going to shake up this defensive line just a little bit. And again, it's a great time to do it. Not just because of the Gary conversation, but because this is a healthy draft, as you're about to see this week at the Combine. It's all I keep hearing about is how strong these DTs are, how there's edge rushers really within the first 3 to 4 rounds that could be starting in 2025. There's edge rushers available on the open market, as we just alluded to. And it's just a good year to act like a revolving door at this position a little bit. And I think Jonathan Allen is a player that falls off this roster. There's only $6 million of dead cap on this thing against the $22 million cap hit. So you're freeing up $16 million for a team that doesn't need the cap space. But boy, if they had it, and it's a situation where they could operate aggressively this year and then roll over more capabilities for next year, again, just trying to plug holes to maximize your value with Jaden Daniels as quickly as possible, I think it makes sense. So it's probably time for, it's been 8 years, Jonathan Allen in Washington. I don't think this contract is tradable. It's basically a 1 for 17. And again, there's so much value out there at this position. I don't think you're going to find a trade partner for this. So I would expect an outright release. And then we'll see just how aggressive this Washington team will be, because they certainly can be over the next 2 to 3 months, both in free agency and in the draft. That's your cap casualty list for February 2025. Obviously, there's plenty more to come. Anytime something comes up, any significant rumor, any serious rumor, we'll detail that stuff both on the site and on the socials and talk about any of the big stuff here. But if you have any questions on the Stafford stuff, maybe on some of these other quarterback moves, Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr, both of which could be extremely interesting and maybe complicated with how they are moved on from in the coming weeks and month, hit me up at SpotTrack, on Threads, on Blue Sky, on X, or even on Facebook for anybody who still uses that. For Scott Allen, my name is Mike Ginnitti. Thanks for listening to this edition of the SpotTrack Podcast.